Hi everyone, it's Nick here from Ignition Human Performance. I hope you're well, and I hope you're enjoying our build up to the British Grand Prix that we've been doing all this week. We are still recovering from our Damon Hill karting day, where we finished 8th, but it was a really good out 33 cars, really good day, and of course, more importantly, raising some money for Halo Project, Damon's charity. So today we've got a very special guest. He worked for McLaren for 14 years as a driver performance coach. He has worked with some very well-known drivers on the grid currently, such as Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Sergio Perez, as well as Stoffel Vandoorne, Kevin Magnussen, and the F2 champion Nyck de Vries. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Simon Reynolds. I shall bring him in now. Let's see if he's there. And there he is.
Hello.
How are you, Simon?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very well. And here we are in the build up to the British Grand Prix. What a week. I can't believe we're here already.
Absolutely, I can't wait. It's going to be an interesting one for sure. I've actually got my little Lewis picture behind me in Heikki Kovalainen,
Very nice.
just to make it a bit apt.
I've actually got, before we start, some really good British Grand Prix memorabilia to show you. We're in our other office today, and I'll show you some of these things. Hang on a second, Simon. You'll like these.
Go on then.
So what have we got? So we've got the programme from the 1972 British Grand Prix, signed by Emerson Fittipaldi.
Wow, nice.
That's good, isn't it?
That's fantastic.
And then we've also got from Brands Hatch. I'm not sure of the year on that. I think that was a race they did, like a non-championship race, signed by James Hunt, ex-McLaren driver James Hunt. So there's a lovely theme there, isn't it?
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's showing me up now. I haven't got anything there.
I can't take all the credit for it. But well
done on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so why don't you, before we get started, why don't you just give a brief overview of who you are, what you were doing? As I said, I gave an instruction about your time at McLaren, but why don't you tell us what that was all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll try not to bore you and the audience too much, but I've been a professional trainer and therapist for the past 25 years, and 15 of those years 14 of those years working with McLaren. But 15 years in motorsport as such, with obviously leaving McLaren at the end of 2019 and then establishing my own business in last year, 2 weeks prior to lockdown. So that was a good timing on my part. I started at McLaren in 2006. I was interviewed by the late great Dr. Aki Hinter, the two Formula One coaches, performance coaches at the time, and Lewis's physio. So as you can imagine, it was a pretty daunting prospect, not only walking through this building that looked like it was something from the future, but then sitting down with the caliber of people that interview me. So I was pretty nervous, to be honest. But it was amazing. I ended up getting the role and never looked back. It was definitely a journey and an adventure, which I look back with really fond memories. So I had the role as driver performance manager. So I was responsible for the young driver program on the human performance side. So I led at one point 12 young drivers: Kevin Magnussen, Nyck de Vries, Jack Harvey, Oliver Rowland, Alex Albon, etc. So there's quite a few names there that I worked with from a young age. So Nyck de Vries, who's a really good friend of mine, I worked with him since the age of 14 for a decade. So sort of 10, 11 years working with Nyck, up to his win in Formula 2. And we still friends and keep in close contact to this day, effectively. So that's obviously a a really nice thing to continue those friendships later on. I was also very fortunate, obviously, to work with Dr. Aki Hintze for a decade. I reported into him about the young drivers. He mentions that sort of relationship in his book called The Core, which is an incredible book where he captures his whole entire life experience, moving from his time in Ethiopia right the way through to Formula One, supporting the likes of Mick Hakkinen, working with obviously Kovalainen and Kimi Räikkönen, and of course Lewis Hamilton and Vettel, to name a few people that he sort of worked closely with to prepare them for racing. I was Heikki Kovalainen's performance coach in 2008, so I supported him and also worked with Lewis and assisted Lewis at the Formula One test events as well. But the three main drivers I supported from a younger age, entry-level Formula and karting, were Stoffel Vandoorne, Kevin Magnussen, and Nyck de Vries. So I worked with Stoffel 4.5 years and Kevin for 5 years, preparing them for Formula One effectively.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and that was really incredible actually to see them, particularly like Stoffel Vandoorne, who I know you worked with quite closely, seeing them actually get to Formula One. I think I remember you telling me once about his first ever race when he was called up for it was at the Bahrain Grand Prix, first race of the season in 2016.
That's right. I remember
that must be incredible to watch. Yeah.
So no, that was That was unbelievable. And Stoffel is a tremendously gifted driver. He had some of the best records below F1 of his time prior to F1. So it was such a pleasure, and an incredible athlete as well. But yeah, no, 2016 he was out testing for Super Formula. I remember at the time. And then he came straight back from doing over 100 laps or whatever it was. And the Super Formula car is quite physical as well. And then put straight into the weekend. So it just showed the level of physicality and preparation that he had going into that weekend. And that was certainly noted, I remember, over the interviews on ITV and Sky Sports, etc. But just seeing Stoffel there at the time and supporting him through that process was an honour, and I still remember it clearly to this day. So hats off to him for finishing P10 and getting the first point for McLaren that season. So it was, if that's accurate. Apologise if it's not. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. But yeah, no, absolutely. It was fantastic working with Stoffel.
Yeah. So obviously British Grand Prix week this week, and we're going to talk a bit more about Silverstone and what the drivers are going to be expecting this weekend. But what have you made of the season so far?
Oh wow, yeah, it's funny because obviously we've been through that difficult period. Everyone's been through the difficult time, and still going through difficult time in terms of the process we've been through since the beginning of near as damn it last 2020. But what a season it's been, and the positive side out of it for Formula One is that it's been probably some of the best racing that I can remember. So yeah, it's been a fantastic season under the difficult circumstances. Verstappen is looking very strong. I think he's won five races so far. Perez 1, and then Lewis 3, I believe. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah,
something like that.
So it's close. It's close. Verstappen's certainly taking a bit of a lead, but it's a long season. I wouldn't write Mercedes off just yet.
No. Never. No, Lewis is a phenomenal driver, and it's definitely going to be a battle for sure. Yeah. But it's good to see Verstappen sort of applying his talent like he is. But no, I think that there's a few changes obviously for this year, for 2020. So they've had I think a 10% reduction in downforce, maybe slightly, and then the tires sort of regulated, so they're pretty much the same. No DAS, is that right? Dual assisted steering.
No, I don't know. Yeah, that's gone.
And so there's a few things happening, but next year is going to be the big year where there's going to be some big changes.
Have you seen the new car today?
I have. I watched the live. I think it was the unveiling of it, I guess, with all the drivers sort of giving their opinions. Yeah. It looks pretty mega, to be honest. Yeah. I'm sure there'll be different configurations from different teams, but the general kind of feel for the car the aesthetic looks fantastic. The arrow-shaped front wing with the big end plates, the kind of the all-in-one, all-encompassing rear wing. Usually the rear wing, they kind of have separate pieces with the end plates, but it's just one sweeping curved kind of rear wing. And then there's a few old kind of rules coming back through for cars. So I believe. I can't recall what they are, but I think there'll be some great racing, and I think the idea is to make the racing a lot closer. So I think that would be really interesting. But I think the overall sleekness of the car and I imagine seeing the aerodynamic profile of it would be interesting. Seeing the sort of airflow over the car itself. But I think it's going to be exciting season this season. Especially seeing Lando and George as well. Yeah. I've known them since they were, I think, 10 and 12 years old or something like that. That's how old I am. I remember meeting them a long time ago, and then obviously lucky enough to work with Lando on the odd occasion at race and tests. So he's a real pleasure to work with, and what a talent! He's showing his real talent this year, for sure, finishing P3.
It's great to see McLaren back up there and competing. And I'm sure as someone who worked for McLaren for such a long time that you concur on that one. It's great, what a brand, and it's great to see it just back near the top.
Oh, it is. I really hope McLaren is a tremendous company with incredible people working for it. That's what makes the company, the company itself. The building of which they occupy, the headquarters, is something out of the future. The James Bond movie set. Yeah. Working there almost every day for 14 years. Wow. I mean, I still had to pinch myself. I'm one of the only people to stand up paddleboard across the lake, so I'm pleased about that. So one of two people. So that was
who's the other one?
Oh, it was we were body doubles. So the other body double for Lando. So I'm not quite sure his name, but it was a fun day.
I seem to remember that's when you were body double for Fernando Alonso. If that's right.
I grew a beard especially for that one. So we looked quite similar. It was quite fun.
So anyway, let's go on to Silverstone. Obviously, tomorrow the guys will be taking part in practice and actually for the first time qualifying on a Friday, because they've got the sprint race on Saturday, which will be a really interesting new development to see how that goes. But what will they be preparing? How as a driver coach, looking back at your time looking after drivers at Silverstone, how will they have prepared over the last couple of weeks for the challenge that is Silverstone?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So Silverstone is one of the most physically challenging circuits because of the high-speed corners. I'll come on to that in a minute, but I'm sure we'll talk about the circuit itself. But yeah, the high speed generates obviously G-force. Multiply that by the sort of your body weight in terms of G-force, or your head weight in terms of head and helmet, which weighs approximately 6.5 kilos. There's going to be a tremendous force going through the neck to support and stabilize the head to maintain the eyes on the horizon. I'll come on to that a little bit. But in terms of the preparation process, the drivers during the season are trying to maintain their physical performance to optimize their driving performance effectively. So leading up to the Grand Prix, Austria being the last race, is that right? That is correct.
Yeah, the last one.
Just want to make sure I'm getting this correct. I'm sure people will check me on things. So the 2-week gap, they're optimizing their recovery during that period. So there'd be a little sort of rest period involving therapy, general rest, some sort of low intensity based aerobic exercise maybe, to sort of recover from the previous weekend. Then sort of optimizing their nutritional intake and balancing their sort of macronutrients and micronutrients, so they're retaining all their essential nutrients they need to optimize their recovery and energy leading into the next race. And then sort of a week, sort of 7 to 10 days prior, it's all then about optimizing their performance and peaking their athleticism. So they will go through a series of prehabilitation exercises to make sure that they're optimizing their dynamic and static posture. So when they get in the car, they feel fresh, mobile, and ready to race. Again, nutrition plays a key part in that process as well. Optimizing their sleep. So the sleep strategies are implemented at least a week before they go to the race. More so for, especially with jet lag protocols for abroad, but for Silverstone, obviously, some of the drivers might have to travel, obviously, abroad for that. But if they're living in the UK, then obviously, or nearer to, then the jet lag protocol is not so necessary. But for some drivers, it will be. But yeah, no, it's a preparation process which is carefully monitored as well. So sleep monitoring, monitoring their training data, monitoring everything to make sure they're fully optimized. So when they go into that race, they feel fresh, they feel focused, they feel ready, their head is clear, cognitively they're optimized as well. So when they sit in that cockpit, they're fully engaged and immersed into preparing, and when the lights go out, off they go. I've always had this this kind of I guess saying, as it were, that if a driver is suboptimal in terms of their physical performance or the mental performance, etc., then they will drive at a suboptimal performance level. So it's super important, and the pressure's on for the driver performance coach to make sure. It's always the most nerve-wracking time I felt personally, making sure the driver is fully prepared, because you are responsible effectively for their preparation.
Yeah, absolutely. So Silverstone, what sort of challenges are they going to be facing this weekend?
Yeah, Silverstone. It's probably one of my favourite tracks, because I guess it's our home track.
It is very much so, yeah.
But it's also, obviously, but it's also the history behind Silverstone as well.
Yeah.
I'm a massive, huge love of Brooklands. Yeah. The first purpose-built racetrack in the world. So I frequent that quite often. To go through the history of it, etc. And I'm really keen advocate of the history of motorsport. In fact, motorsport, for some people who don't know, came from horse racing. So even all the rules, the colours, silks, the weighing of the scales, etc., all came from horse racing. So we've got a lot to thank for horse racing. One of the most physical tracks in the world is Silverstone. So obviously Maggots and Beckett's. That flows through to Copse. So they're building up and generating about 200 miles an hour. The lateral G-force in those corners is around 5G, slightly over, possibly with, and this is looking at the Y-axis when we look at G-force. Okay, so you may have heard of X and Z, but we're looking at the Y-axis, so the lateral G-force against the side of the head. Yep. So if you take the actual head weight, which is approximately about 5 kilos, add 1.5 kilos for the helmet, that's 6.5 kilos, multiply that by the G-force itself, you're looking around 25 to 30 kilos of G against your head. Yeah. So that's approximately equivalent to an 8-year-old child, thereabouts, of weight. Or if you go to the gym and you pick up 25, 30 kilos, you certainly know that's heavy weight against your head. Yeah. So don't try that at home, obviously. So it's something that drivers train for from a very young age. We condition them to be able to perform at that level, and the drivers get gradually exposed to those G-forces over a long period of time, with most drivers starting their careers in karting, which still generate 2 to 2.5 G in the corners. So they're developing from a young age in that respect. the sensation for an F1 driver would be something that us mere mortals could never experience, apart from maybe on a simulator or a game. But actually the sweeping around the corners of Maggots and Beckett's, and then making sure that your braking points and your corner entry, hitting your apexes and sweeping around to generate enough speed from the exit through to COPS is something that that must feel absolutely tremendous. Very exhilarating, I'm sure. And there's been a lot of documentaries by a number of drivers like Mansell, etc., explaining what that feels like and what it was like back in his day, which looks incredible. The F1 cars now generate 6G under braking, so the amount of downforce, slightly less downforce than last year, but they're still generating huge amounts of G-force. So the drivers have to optimize their performance physically, for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's interesting you say that about, Mansell talking about it in his time, and actually the challenges now that the driver would face in these particular cars, which are a lot faster. I mean, it's probably 7 or 8 seconds faster a lap now, albeit Silverstone's changed quite considerably over those years, but very much different challenges to what, say, a Nigel Mansell was doing, purely because he was probably much more on the strength of the car, whereas I'd imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's much more about the head and being in the cockpit now for the drivers. The actual steering is much lighter, easier. Obviously, they've got much more to think about in terms of what's on the steering wheel, but I'd imagine it's much more around the head and the neck, particularly, rather than the sort of brute force of the Ayrton Sennas and Nigel Mansells of that day. Am I right there?
Yeah, kind of, yes. I mean, the drivers, when they're sat in the cockpit, from a ergonomic or biomechanical position of the driver, it's certainly less optimal for kind of coming out of the car and being very dynamic, like a rugby player, football player, etc. They're heavily strapped in by harnesses into the cockpit itself, so very little movement there. There's tremendous G-force that they experience also through their body, so they have to brace through the corners to protect their vital organs and their spine. Their spine through the seat is quite flexed in their position, so when they come out of the car, as a performance coach, you've got to try and unwind that to some degree. So they're straight onto the therapy couch, and you're trying to increase their thoracic upper spine extension ability again, because they've been in that very sort of flexed position the whole time whilst they've been in the car, and very compressed with the actual harness, and the sternum itself is very compressed, which sort of compresses a little bit down into the diaphragm. So if you don't deal with those things, breathing can be affected possibly. And also then to just reactivate them back into their sort of normal feel, etc. As in terms of their recovery process after the race. But in terms of the actual race itself for Silverstone, it's definitely one of the most physical, and it's definitely something that performance coaches will need to consider greatly, going into the race compared to some of the other circuits. So just optimizing the neck, and we do quite a bit of pre-activation of the neck complex, so holding the head isometrically and actually engaging the muscles. I've worked quite closely with Gatherer Systems, who create this fantastic neck harness that I've used for a decade or so, or more than that, I think, and that effectively helps to then engage the muscles. So a pre-activation of muscles means that when you get in the car, the muscles are pre-activated. So on the warm-up lap, you don't have to then go through the process of them warming up itself. So the drivers will have a certain way of warming up. It's all individualized. So you need to understand your athlete and make sure that you take them through that process that they also find beneficial. So the coach is there to guide the driver, but the driver needs to give feedback to say whether that process is actually working for them. So so individualization is the most important practice of a performance coach, effectively, in my opinion. So I think it's something that I certainly learned from Aki Hintsa, who will always be my hero, my mentor. Somebody I miss every day, and he set up this fantastic institute with amazing coaches and people that work there, Pete McKnight, etc. So yeah, it's going to be a great race, I'm sure, and the process itself is going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I've got some, just talking about Silverstone, I found these earlier, some pictures, and I believe that's
Oh
you.
no!
Am I pointing at the right place? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and then we've got
oh no,
that man holding out the pit board. Now this is 2008. Now I
wow.
remember this race very well. I was sat not as close as the actions as you were in that picture, definitely, and we'll talk about that in a second. I remember being sat in a grandstand in 2008, and I have to be honest, the weather was absolutely miserable.
Yes, it was.
But
I remember.
But as soon as the race got going, everyone seemed to forget about that, because it's probably one of the best races there's been.
Yes.
I seem to remember Kovalainen, I think, had pole position.
He did.
But very early on in the race got overtaken by Lewis, who went to win the race by nearly a lap, I think. It was incredible and phenomenal. Everyone was spinning. I remember Massa span about, it seemed about 20 times, probably being dramatic, but it did seem that sort of thing. Now, a race like that, and I've got a picture of you there on the grid, right in the heart of the action. What was the atmosphere like that day? Well, what is it like on the Silverstone grid before the British Grand Prix, particularly working for a British team?
Yeah, I mean, it's an honour to work for McLaren. Obviously, it's, you pinch yourself every time. I mean, being on the grid. To be perfectly honest, being on the grid is probably not. It's probably nicer for somebody not working, because you're fully engaged and focused on your job.
Yeah.
You kind of, at the corner of your eye, you might see your hero celebrity walk past, but then you're so fully immersed in what your responsibility is, which is obviously to optimize and prepare the driver, that you've got little time for anything else. So the drivers, some drivers obviously need to empty their bladder prior to getting into the cockpit. So you need to, logistically, you need to know where the bathroom and toilet is. The worst scenario is that the engineer says, right, I need the driver back in so many minutes, and then you don't know where the bathroom is or the toilet is, and it might seem like such a trivial thing, but everything in Formula One is attention to detail, extremely structured, extremely organised to the nth degree, and everything is timed perfectly. And the engineers at McLaren and all the teams are the brightest people in the entire world, and they work from data insight, and they also work from the clock. So there's little old me, only years back, just a humble personal trainer, and I'm then thrusted into this world of Formula One, what a tremendous time it was, but nerve-wracking at the same time. Yeah, I remember the time in Australia where my umbrella started rolling down the track, down the grid, and I had to run after it. I was so embarrassed. So I made sure after that that never happened again. So I always tied the umbrella down, so the helmet was.
You learned from your mistakes. That's good. That's a good high performance tip. You learned from the errors. Yeah.
So yeah, I tied it down, and the funny thing is, as a performance coach, you have spares of everything. So you couldn't name one thing that you didn't have a spare of. So if it rained, you had a spare helmet, and then you had another spare helmet, and then their actual helmet they're going to race in. You had spare tear-offs, you had spare all your therapy kit, all of your the driver's undergarments, race suits, everything, anything you can think of, we had spares of. And God forbid if you didn't have that particular item that you needed at one point. So I remember one race as well where I forgot the driver's cap. So they have to wear the cap when they go up and do the national anthem, and I forgot it because I didn't have my spare.
Oh, I bet Vodafone were angry with you.
So I never forgot it again after that.
No, I bet you didn't. No, I bet you didn't. Yeah, it may be a cap to some people. For a lot of for one company or two, or McLaren as well, it's probably worth a hell of a lot of money having that cap on his head. Jeez, yeah. No, absolutely. But and was the atmosphere? I mean, obviously you say you're absolutely focused on what you're doing, and that must have been quite difficult actually, where you are focusing and you have got celebrities, Martin Brundle and his grid walk, you know, and all. How did you just sort of focus? How were you able to sort of block that out and just focus on the driver?
I think because, you know, when you have that responsibility, there's a level of stress, elevated stress, so adrenaline, and that certainly kicked in for me, and I think that really focuses you. It's something obviously that the drivers use to focus and apply themselves on track, but and for the whole team. So for me personally, as I said, there's lots going on around you. It's a very busy, extremely busy environment, but you're able to fully engage with your duty and make sure the driver gets into the cockpit okay. His hands device is attached to the helmet. That's just a little thing to make sure that that's done for safety. Checking, just even checking, and I always did the sweep across the visor to make sure that the drivers could see through the visor effectively. Making sure their gloves were okay. There was no issues. There was no tags hanging off or bits they weren't happy with, so you could come across with your scissors and quickly unstitch it or whatever it was. Just little tiny things. Attention to detail was taught to me by McLaren. It's something that I carry through to this day. So especially again with obviously under Ron as well, the attention to detail was magnificent, and that's something that I carry through to this day. Hence why the kind of the house and everything has to be immaculate. But that's more my wife, to be fair, not me.
Yeah, because working with someone like Ron Dennis, that must have been such a privilege. You know, a real legend of the sport, and you say you picked up a few elements of his precision and stuff. Was there anything else you learned from him? We always like hearing about the leaders of Formula One and talking to people who've worked for them. Were there any sort of key pieces of advice that he taught you from working with him?
Oh, massive. I mean, Ron was wow. I mean, again, another legend and hero of mine, and I'm just saying that because I worked there. But it just he had time for everyone. And me personally, I knew Ron personally, and what an honour it was to know him. And yeah, I mean, I think it was the attention to detail, the insight into what it takes to be meticulous to the point where everything feels very orchestrated. So the choir and the orchestra, etc., come together in harmony. And this is exactly what happens when you go to a race. So all the teams go through the same process, as well as McLaren, and they all have this chemistry that works as a team to make sure the cars perform optimally and the drivers perform optimally, who obviously are in control of the cars. But Ron's attention to detail was one of the most important things for me. And I think going through and owning your own business and starting up your own business, especially through such a daunting period coming into the first lockdown, etc. But I think McLaren and overall, and Ron as well, taught me so much about how to optimize yourself, and obviously Aki Hinser as well, obviously. So I think those three elements there really I feel very privileged and lucky to have been through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So because I want to talk to you a bit more about Formula to Perform and what you do with young drivers at the moment, so I think that's really interesting. But before we leave the Silverstone story, a prediction for the race. Who do you think is going to win?
Oh, don't ask me that. Lando.
Lando, wow, that'd be awesome.
I mean, Lando's such a great driver. I don't know. I'm going to leave it out there for this one. I think all the drivers are tremendous, and I wish them all the success. And you never know what's going to happen, especially at Silverstone. It normally rains, so we know certain drivers, especially Lewis, perform amazingly well in the rain. So in the wet, I think it would be certainly one I'm going to watch avidly. and I can't wait for it, basically.
And actually, talking of British drivers, obviously you're in the unique position where you have worked with Lewis and you've also worked with Lando. We're seeing, a bit of a change of regard. And obviously, Lewis has just signed a new 2-year deal with Mercedes, so he'll be around for a while. But obviously, we are seeing drivers like Lando and George Russell come through from a British point of view. Are there comparisons between Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris?
What a great question again. Thanks, Nick. I think all the drivers have very similar traits. I think personality dictates quite a lot when it comes to human performance generally. So your application of your driving performance can be dictated from multiple variables. But I think when it comes to Lewis, he's a phenomenal driver. He has all the attributes that a driver needs to optimize their performance on track. Lando is certainly an inspiring driver that's coming up through the ranks now with the qualities that you would expect of an elite level driver. And I predict that he will be world champion at some point in the near future. And he deserves to be. And also George Russell as well, I think is a future champion as well. So, and that's and of course the other multiple other drivers have those same key attributes. So I think from a athletic perspective or athleticism perspective, again, drivers are different and have different ways of preparing. But as I said earlier, as a performance coach, it's all about individualization and making sure that you work with the person in front of you to effectively make sure they're fully prepared, and especially for Silverstone.
Absolutely. So the driver in front of you, obviously your business is Formula to Perform. Why don't you tell us who you're working with Formula to Perform and sort of how you've put the philosophy from McLaren into your own business?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a little basic insight into it. So my main business is obviously continuing working and preparing racing drivers. So applying all of the knowledge and learning from McLaren and working with Dr. Aki Hintzer, etc. And really, but trying to establish my own way and my own methodologies and principles that I've found have worked over the years. So I've been very fortunate, very lucky to work with 9 Formula One drivers at race and test events. I'm very good friends with Lando's trainer, so he very kindly asked if I could support Lando in 2019 for the German Grand Prix and a test events, etc. And then working from with over 40 racing drivers during 15 years or so, maybe more, but preparing those drivers from karting or entry-level Formula through to Formula One, I think is something that I'm most proud of, that I can then use that experience to apply into this new business, which I named Formula to Perform, because I've developed this formula which I believe works to optimize a driver's performance in the cockpit or kart, especially working with Nyck de Vries for so long, and Alex Albon and Ben Barnicoat. We won multiple world championships together back in the day, so I'll always remember that. So my expertise really is helping young drivers transition, whether it's from karting to Formula or karting to cars, and then from entry-level Formula through into the higher echelons of the sport as well. So at some point, I would like to sort of progress myself back into maybe the higher echelons possibly, but I'm really focused at the moment. I'm really enjoying the karting level. I'm working with a few very good karters who are looking to sort of progress into cars. So I'm really excited about the opportunity of working with them in the future again, or as well. But I created this model which you know about called Perform Hex. It's a performance model, and effectively it helps a driver understand how to prepare. It's very basic in terms of its principles, but it gives greater insight into the rationale of why each of those components of the model are important to prepare. So, for example, there's a foundational aspect to the model which looks at nutrition, mindset, and recovery effectively, and then layers up into strength and looking at their sort of biomechanics or the way that they move, etc. And then layering up that, once they've established that stability, to be able to have the endurance capacity to last the race.
Yeah.
It does go much more into detail, but effectively those are the very basic sort of components of it. I also work with Will Stevens, who's a really good friend of mine. He won at the Elms series, the European Le Mans at the weekend, which was amazing.
Brilliant, yeah.
So really chuffed about that. So he was obviously very happy about that, and he drove really well. Did the last stint. Of course,
so that was Will also was in Formula One back in 2014, I think it was, with Caterham, Marisha and Caterham, wasn't it? With Will?
Yes, I believe so. Yes,
I think it was those two. Yeah. So obviously coming out of Formula One, and then as you said, the European Le Mans series. I'm sure it's a very different challenge for a driver.
It is, yeah, absolutely. It's I think Will's definitely found his forte, as they say, in terms of the endurance racing. He's a great athlete, tremendous person, and a great driver. So most importantly, with what we're talking about. So yeah, it's the other things I'm working on as well is a corporate wellbeing. So a program that I've been running in a company with massive success, which I'm proud of again for over a year now, and we've had some great records from that. So hopefully that's something that we're going to roll out in the future. Maybe there's a huge amount of business potential and opportunity for business and leaders to learn from Formula One. I think the insights into teamwork and focus and attention to detail is one of the attributes and things that you learn, especially working with those incredible companies, and the opportunity to learn from winning and losing. We learn from failure more than we do when we win. Most people don't tend to analyze when they win. They tend to focus on the sort of aspects of when they lose. But we can learn a hell of a lot from when we win as well. So I think just learning from those things, I think it's amazing. I'm obviously working with you and Halo, Damon Hill's charity, which I'm really keen.
We're doing next week. We'll be doing our CV and interview session for the young people at Halo, which would be great fun. We haven't, it's been a while with COVID. We haven't been able to deliver one of those face to face in a while. So I'm really looking forward to having you down for that and sharing your experience of how you found yourself in a role at McLaren and working with the likes of Lewis and stuff. I know they're really going to enjoy that. So no, that's going to be a really good day.
I can't wait. And it was amazing to come along and support you at the karting event.
Absolutely, it was great having you there. Having you on board as the advice. I'm sure that's what helped us secure an 8th place.
Out of how many?
33.
Amazing. So brilliant. It was, in all seriousness, it was brilliant. And thank you so much. And it was lovely to meet everyone. I met Esme as well, and had a quick chat about DTM. So that was brilliant. She's an incredible driver, and will go on to massive things in the future. So it was lovely to get that opportunity. But I think it's going to be exciting for few years ahead. I think, especially you and I working together, and we spend quite a bit of time together now, which is fantastic. I'm just really excited about the future, really.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Simon. Really appreciate it. Great to have a good chat. And I'm sure there's plenty that people can take away from this conversation, because it is all about high performance. And as you rightly said, it's the lessons that we can learn from what happens at the weekend and actually put into our business life. That really shows that we can achieve high performance as well, not just on track but in our work life as well. So really appreciate that, Simon, and I'm sure we'll do more of these as time goes on, because it's great to get your insights. You've been there, you've got the t-shirt, your Vodafone t-shirts.
I've got my Formula Form t-shirt on.
Your Formula Form t-shirt now. You've got your I like the plug there, that was good.
It's not a plug. It's not a plug.
Not a plug. And yeah, how can people find out more if there's a young driver who's interested in your services? How can they find out more about yourself and Formula to Perform?
Yeah, so they can just pop across to my website, which is formula2perform.com, and get in contact. But thank you so much for today. It's been fantastic as always, Nick. Thank you so much. If anyone's listening, I really appreciate it. And yeah, I really look forward to this weekend. I wish all the drivers massive luck and success, I'm sure. And let's see what happens.
Absolutely. So yeah, thanks everyone who tuned in. As we say, we'll be at the Silverstone tomorrow and Saturday, so we will be filming some behind the scenes stuff. So do stay tuned to Ignition Perform on Instagram and our other social media channels. But thank you for watching. So really appreciate everyone's time and yours, Simon. So thanks very much.
Thank you.